The wind cut across the barren plains like a whip, carrying with it the scent of smoke and blood. Emma staggered through the uneven terrain, her dress torn and soaked in dirt and crimson. Every step sent a jolt of pain through her shattered ankle, and she clutched her side where a deep gash refused to stop bleeding. She had been left behind. The settlers, men she had once thought were protectors, neighbors, friends, had turned on her in a moment of brutal greed. Her mind swirled with confusion and fear. She had witnessed homes burning, people fleeing, and then, in a cruel twist of fate, the attackers had assumed she wouldn't survive the night alone. They had left her sprawled in the shadow of the canyon cliffs, convinced the wilderness would finish the job. Yet despite the fear, a small ember of hope refused to die within her. She dragged herself along the ground, the rocks cutting into her palms, whispering a silent prayer for salvation that seemed impossibly far away. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the horizon in shades of blood red and gold, when she heard the faintest sound, soft, deliberate, almost imperceptible above the howl of the wind. At first she imagined it was a trick of her exhausted mind, but then the sound came again. The careful tread of footsteps, deliberate and measured, unlike any settler's careless approach. She froze, heart hammering. Her eyes, blurred with tears and exhaustion, searched the shadows. From the dimming light emerged a figure, moving with a grace that belonged to the land itself. His skin was bronzed by the sun, and his eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to pierce through the layers of her fear and despair. He carried a small bundle, carefully wrapped, and his movements were precise, almost silent. The air around him held the calm certainty of a man accustomed to surviving where others faltered. Emma tried to speak, but her voice cracked into a whisper. "Please, help me." The man knelt beside her without a word, assessing her injuries with practiced eyes. Every movement he made was deliberate, examining her wound, tearing a strip from his cloak to bind it, pressing herbs into the gash to staunch the bleeding. He worked quickly but gently, and for the first time in hours, Emma felt a flicker of relief. She didn't understand his language, but the care in his touch spoke louder than words. Hours passed in silence. The sun dipped below the horizon, replaced by the cold bite of night. Yet he remained, keeping a small fire between them. Emma shivered, both from the cold and from the lingering terror of the day, but he covered her with a thick blanket he had brought. The crackling fire reflected in his eyes, and for a moment she wondered if this man, this stranger from a world so unlike her own, was the only hope she had left. As she drifted between consciousness and the fevered haze of pain, she realized something extraordinary. She was not alone. Against all odds, someone had found her. Someone who understood the harshness of the land and respected it. Someone who could, perhaps, save her from the fate the settlers had left for her. When she finally spoke again, her voice was no more than a breath. "Who are you?" The man did not answer. He merely watched her, his gaze steady, protective. And in that moment, Emma understood something primal. Her life, fragile as it was, had been claimed by someone stronger, someone who had appeared when all hope seemed lost. She didn't yet know who he was, or what his intentions might be, but she knew this. For the first time since the attack, she might survive. And survival, she realized, was only the beginning. Dawn broke over the jagged cliffs, spilling golden light across the rugged landscape. Emma stirred, her body still aching, but her mind alert enough to notice the figure beside her. The Apache scout, he had not yet shared his name, was already moving, surveying the horizon with sharp, calculating eyes. He seemed part of the land itself, attuned to every whisper of wind, every rustle of brush, every distant cry of a predator. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her side. He knelt beside her again, pressing a finger to her lips before she could speak. Then, without words, he gestured for her to follow him. Emma hesitated. Her fear of the unknown warred with her desire to survive, but the memory of the settlers' betrayal and the reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature left her no choice. She nodded weakly. The scout's movements were deliberate and silent. He led her along narrow paths hidden by brush and rock, places where even the keenest eyes would struggle to notice them. He carried only a small pack and a bow slung across his back, yet every step he took exuded confidence. Emma struggled to keep pace, her legs trembling from exhaustion. He noticed her faltering and slowed, occasionally offering her his hand, helping her over stones and fallen logs. Despite his silence, Emma felt an odd sense of reassurance. There was no chatter, no empty words, just steady guidance. She began to observe his methods, the way he read the terrain, the way he seemed to anticipate danger before it arrived. His eyes were always scanning, never resting, as if the land itself spoke to him. She realized he was more than a man. He was a tracker, a guardian, a force honed by years of living in harmony with the wilderness. By midday, they reached a shallow stream. The scout motioned for Emma to kneel, and she watched as he cupped his hands to drink. Then, without a word, he offered her the same. The water was cold and sweet, reviving some of her strength. He then collected small leaves and roots, crushing them into a poultice for her side. Emma winced as he applied it, but the pain was tempered by the quiet efficiency with which he worked. As they traveled, Emma attempted to speak again. "Where are we going?" The scout glanced at her briefly, his dark eyes revealing nothing, and pointed toward a distant ridge where smoke rose, perhaps a sign of life, perhaps danger. Then he looked back, as if insisting that words were unnecessary. Emma realized that he communicated through gestures, through presence, and through action. It was a language she would have to learn if she wanted to survive. Hours passed in this silent companionship. Emma began to notice details she had overlooked in her haze of fear. The way he paused to track footprints in the dust, the subtle shift in the wind that indicated approaching wildlife, the way he balanced speed with caution to ensure they were not followed. Each observation taught her something new, about him, about the land, and about her own fragile body. That evening, as they settled in a sheltered alcove beneath an overhanging cliff, Emma watched him build a small fire. He seemed to work instinctively, placing dry branches in a pattern that encouraged steady burning. When the flames rose, he handed her a piece of dried meat and a shallow bowl of water. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust him entirely, yet hunger and fatigue pushed her forward. She ate, silently acknowledging that her survival now depended on this stranger. By the time night fell, Emma had begun to understand the quiet rhythm of his presence. He was not just a guide or a rescuer. He was a protector, a constant shadow ensuring that the wilderness did not claim her. And though she had been abandoned by others, she realized that she had been found by someone whose loyalty, though unspoken, was absolute. She curled up near the fire, exhaustion pulling her into sleep. Yet her mind could not fully rest. Questions lingered. Who was he? Why had he saved her? What did it mean when he looked at her, not with ownership, but with a measured, almost reverent intensity? In the distance, the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint promise of both danger and discovery. Emma closed her eyes, clinging to one truth above all. She was no longer entirely alone, and for the first time since the attack, survival felt possible. The next morning, the forested ridges opened into a broad valley where the Apache scouts people lived. Smoke curled lazily from small earthen dwellings, and the sounds of daily life, children's laughter, the rhythmic pounding of tools, the soft murmur of conversation, filled the air. Emma's heart raced. She had never seen a world like this, and for the first time, she felt the weight of being utterly foreign. The scout led her toward the encampment, his gaze alert, scanning. For any sign of threat, Emma's steps were hesitant. She could feel the eyes of the tribe upon her, some curious, some wary. She tried to smile, but it came out stiff, awkward. Every motion she made seemed exaggerated, clumsy, like a dancer stumbling into a new performance. He finally stopped near a fire pit, gesturing for her to remain still. From the shadows, a few of the tribe's elders approached. Their eyes were sharp, observing her every feature, every gesture. Emma sensed their scrutiny and felt exposed, naked even, in her ignorance of their customs. One elder, a woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward. She spoke quickly in their language, her tone neither harsh nor welcoming. The scout glanced at Emma, then gestured for her to remain silent. Emma swallowed hard. She tried to repeat the words she thought she had heard, but they fell awkwardly from her lips, eliciting a soft, almost amused exchange among the elders. The scout's expression remained unreadable, though he placed a protective hand on her shoulder, grounding her. As the hours passed, Emma began to understand the subtle rules of the tribe. Every movement, every gesture, held meaning. Sitting too close to the fire without permission could be seen as disrespect. Taking water without offering thanks might be interpreted as insolence. Even her clothing, unfamiliar and torn, drew curious eyes. The cultural chasm seemed vast, and Emma realized that her survival depended not just on physical endurance, but on mastering these invisible codes. That evening, the scout led her to a secluded tent-like structure. He placed a small bundle of blankets inside and gestured for her to rest. She hesitated, feeling the tension of unfamiliar eyes upon her. But he simply nodded, a silent promise of protection. She lay down, the scent of herbs from the poultice still clinging to her, and felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. She was a stranger in this world, yet she was alive because of him. Over the next few days, Emma struggled to adapt. The scout taught her how to move silently through the forest, how to observe without being seen, how to hunt small game with patience and precision. He rarely spoke, but his lessons were clear. Each day brought new challenges, and with each, Emma's confidence grew, though so did her awareness of just how different her world was from his. Conflict arose when Emma inadvertently violated a custom. She reached for a water jug without offering the customary greeting, and the elders' murmurs filled the air. Emma's face flushed crimson. The scout placed a steadying hand on her arm, giving her a look that seemed to say, "Learn, observe, respect." He demonstrated the proper gesture, showing her how a small bow of the head and a soft acknowledgement could transform a misstep into respect. Emma copied him, feeling the subtle shift in tension around her. Despite the difficulties, she began to notice something remarkable. The scouts' people were not harsh, only disciplined. Their customs, though strange to her, were rooted in respect for the land, for each other, and for life itself. Emma realized that if she could navigate this world, she might find not just survival, but belonging. At night, by the fire, the scout finally spoke a few words in her tongue. They were clipped, rough, yet intentional. Safe. He pointed toward the blankets where she slept, then toward the distant horizon. Emma understood the promise. He had brought her from death to life, from the chaos of violence to a place of order, and though she was still a stranger, he would not abandon her. As sleep pulled her under, Emma's thoughts swirled. She had been claimed by a man and a people she barely understood, thrust into a culture that frightened and fascinated her. Yet for the first time since the attack, she felt the stirrings of trust and perhaps something more, an unspoken connection with the silent guardian who had saved her from the wilderness and from herself. The morning sun spilled across the valley, gilding the simple dwellings of the Apache camp in a soft glow. Birds chirped and children laughed, unaware of the tension brewing near the fire pit. Emma followed the scout, her steps hesitant but steady. She had grown accustomed to his silent presence, the calm certainty he exuded. Yet today, there was a weight in the air, a sense of inevitability she could not name. The scout stopped in the center of the encampment, and Emma instinctively paused a few steps behind him. The tribe's elders approached, their faces solemn. Women and men of all ages gathered around, curiosity and caution flickering in their eyes. The scout turned to Emma, his gaze steady, and gestured for her to remain calm. She nodded, unsure what he intended. Then he did something that made Emma's heart pound and her stomach twist. He stepped closer, took her hand gently in his, and spoke in his language with a cadence both formal and solemn. She did not understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a declaration, a statement meant to bind, to claim. The elders whispered among themselves, their expressions a mixture of surprise and approval. Emma froze, shock rooting her to the spot. She had never imagined that her survival would lead to this, her being publicly claimed as someone's bride. Her mind raced, questions tumbling over one another. Did she even have a choice? Was this some custom she could refuse? Or had she, in being saved, been swept into a bond she did not yet comprehend? The scout did not speak another word. He simply held her hand, his expression calm and unwavering. Slowly he gestured for her to step forward. Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. Yet as she looked into his dark, steady gaze, something shifted within her. The fear that had defined her since the attack began to blend with a strange trust, a quiet acknowledgement that the man who had saved her life had not done so lightly, and that perhaps she could rely on him in this unfamiliar world. An elder stepped forward, speaking softly in the scout's language. He gestured for Emma to respond in whatever way she could. She hesitated, then offered a small bow, imitating the gesture the scout had shown her days before. The elders murmured, some nodding in approval. The scout's lips curved slightly, a near imperceptible acknowledgement that she had taken her first step toward understanding and acceptance. Still, Emma's heart pounded. She had survived the wilderness, endured injuries and fear, and now she faced the overwhelming reality of entering a world of customs, rules, and expectations that were alien to her. Her survival had earned her life, but this claim, this declaration, demanded something more: trust, courage, and the willingness to step into the unknown. As the day wore on, Emma began to see the layers beneath the formality of the ceremony. The scout's actions were not about ownership or control. They were about protection, about ensuring that she had a place within the tribe and a guardian who would stand by her. His claim, though shocking, carried a promise. She would be safe, respected, and given a chance to live fully in a world she had never known. By evening, the initial tension began to ease. Children approached cautiously, offering shy smiles. Women showed her how to prepare simple meals over the fire. The scout remained nearby, silent but attentive, watching her with eyes that spoke of vigilance and patience. Emma realized that the claim was not the end of her autonomy. It was a beginning, a bridge to a new life and a new way of seeing the world. That night, lying beneath the blankets in the small tent the scout had prepared, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had been abandoned, left for dead in the wilderness, yet fate had placed her in the care of someone whose skill, honor, and quiet strength could not be underestimated. The scout had claimed her, yes, but in doing so, he had also offered her the gift of belonging, of safety, and of trust. As she drifted into a fitful sleep, Emma understood one undeniable truth. Her life had changed irrevocably. She had been claimed, But in that claim, she had also found the fragile beginnings of hope, courage, and perhaps something she had never dared imagine: love. The morning air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Emma followed the Apache scout as he led her beyond the encampment, deeper into the rugged wilderness. The trail ahead was uneven and treacherous, a maze of jagged rocks, sudden ravines, and dense underbrush. Each step required concentration, and Emma felt the ache in her limbs from the previous day's journey. Yet despite the exhaustion, a sense of purpose propelled her forward. She was learning to survive, and she had someone watching over her, whose skill and presence made survival possible. The scout moved with fluid precision, scanning the landscape, pausing occasionally to crouch and examine footprints or broken branches. Emma mimicked his movements as best she could, slowly understanding the subtleties of tracking, the direction of disturbed grass, the faint drag of a boot, the broken twig signaling passage. She realized that every step carried meaning, every sound could reveal danger. Their path took them along a narrow ridge overlooking a winding river. Suddenly the scout halted, crouched low, and motioned for Emma to do the same. Ahead, a band of hostile settlers moved through the valley, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes searching for any sign of life. Emma's heart pounded. She had thought the wilderness alone was dangerous, but now the threat of men armed with violence loomed large. The scout gestured for silence, then pointed to a hidden path beneath thick foliage. Slowly and deliberately, he guided Emma along it, keeping them out of sight. Each movement was calculated, each breath measured. Emma's fear battled with awe as she watched him navigate danger with effortless skill. She realized that she was not just being protected, she was being taught how to survive on her own, to read the world as he did. Hours passed in tense silence. Occasionally, the scout would signal a stop, instructing Emma in gestures and motions she did not yet fully understand. He showed her how to move without snapping a branch, how to keep her shadow from revealing her presence, and how to breathe in rhythm with the forest. Emma's confidence grew, slowly replacing her terror with cautious determination. Night fell, and they made camp beneath a rocky overhang. Emma helped build a small fire, her hands trembling with both cold and lingering fear. The scout watched, her silently correcting mistakes with gentle gestures. When the fire was ready, he handed her a piece of dried meat and a canteen of water. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and nourishment, the realization sinking in that she was no longer alone in the world. Their journey brought other challenges as well. A sudden rainstorm forced them to seek shelter. A startled bear blocked their path, and venomous snakes lurked in the undergrowth. Each danger tested Emma's endurance, her courage, and her trust in the scout. She faltered at times, but he was always there, steady, unflinching, and protective. Slowly, the bond between them deepened. Words were unnecessary. Their survival depended on instinct, trust, and mutual reliance. On the third day, as they crossed a sun-dappled meadow, Emma finally allowed herself to speak. Why help me?" she asked, voice trembling. The scout glanced at her, his eyes softening for the briefest moment. He pointed to her injuries, then to the wilderness surrounding them, then finally toward the distant horizon. Emma understood. He had saved her because she was in danger, and because he had the strength and duty to act. His reasons were simple, yet profound. Life was precious, and he had preserved hers. As the sun set, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, Emma realized how far she had come. The wilderness that once seemed an enemy now felt alive with possibility. She was learning, adapting, surviving. And she was no longer afraid, because the silent guardian who had claimed her as his bride was always near, guiding her, protecting her, and silently teaching her the rhythms of the land. In that shared journey through danger, Emma understood the truth of her situation. Survival alone was no longer enough. To live fully, she would need to trust, to adapt, and perhaps, against all odds, to open her heart. And for the first time since the attack, the wilderness felt less like a prison and more like a place of possibility, where danger and hope walked side by side, and where the scout's presence offered the fragile promise of safety, connection, and something far more powerful than mere survival. The days that followed were quieter than the frantic struggle of the journey, but they carried their own challenges. Emma settled into the rhythms of the Apache camp, observing and learning. Every motion, every task had meaning, and she found herself both fascinated and overwhelmed by the precision and care with which the tribe lived. The scout remained a constant presence. He did not speak much, but his lessons were everywhere. In the way he hunted, in the way he tracked game, and in the subtle gestures he used to communicate with others. Emma learned to observe the wind, to read the tracks of animals, and to move with a lightness that belied the weight of her exhaustion. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of belonging, even as she struggled to understand customs and language that were foreign to her. One morning, he led her to a small clearing near the river. "Water," he said softly, pointing to the rippling current. Emma bent to scoop the cool liquid, and he demonstrated how to test for safe plants along the bank, teaching her which leaves were edible and which could bring harm. She listened carefully, mimicking his gestures until her movements became fluid, almost instinctive. In return, she taught him small things from her own world. She showed him how to fashion crude bandages from fabric, and how certain herbs could be prepared to relieve pain in ways he had not used. Though the scout did not speak in her language, she sensed a growing respect in the way he studied her hands at work, the tilt of his head when he observed her methods. Life in the camp introduced Emma to the community she had once only glimpsed from a distance. She learned to help with daily tasks, preparing food, gathering firewood, and assisting with the children. Each interaction carried lessons, not just in survival, but in respect, patience, and humility. There were moments of misunderstanding, of course. She tripped over invisible rules, mispronounced words, and sometimes failed to anticipate the subtle etiquette of the tribe. Yet, the scout's steady presence always reminded her, learning is a journey, not a moment. Their bond deepened in the quiet routines of daily life. Though words remained sparse, the moments between them spoke volumes. The scout would gesture for her to follow during hunting trips, showing her how to move silently through the forest. At night, he would sit nearby as she tended the small fire, his watchful eyes ensuring she slept without fear. Slowly, Emma began to realize that the connection between them was more than survival. It was trust, built day by day through shared effort and mutual reliance. Yet, even as she grew stronger and more capable, Emma was acutely aware of the differences that separated her from this world. The customs were unfamiliar, the language elusive, and the rituals sometimes intimidating. One evening, during a small ceremonial gathering, she faltered in her response to a greeting, and the elders murmured softly. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but the scout touched her shoulder, a quiet signal of reassurance. She had made a mistake, but she was not alone. Over time, she noticed subtler things about him, his patience, his unwavering vigilance, his silent pride in the way she adapted. Each gesture, each glance, conveyed more than words ever could. Emma began to understand that learning each other's worlds was not about speaking the same language, but about recognizing the intentions behind actions, the care in silence, and the trust in shared experience. By the end of the week, Emma could move through the camp with confidence, performing tasks with care, observing rituals with respect, and even anticipating certain needs of the tribe. She had learned more than survival, skills. She had learned resilience, adaptability, and a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. That night, lying beneath the stars, she glanced at the scout. He sat nearby, watching the fire, a calm silhouette against the flickering light. Emma realized that in saving her life, teaching her the ways of the land, and guiding her into the camp. He had given her more than safety. He had given her understanding, and with it, a chance to belong. For the first time since the attack, she felt a quiet peace. The wilderness had been harsh, the journey had been perilous, and the customs foreign, yet she had survived. She had learned, adapted, and discovered a fragile but undeniable truth. Life could be reclaimed and trust could be built, even in the most unexpected of places. And in that trust, perhaps, something deeper was beginning to grow. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythms of camp life began to shape Emma in ways she had never anticipated. Each dawn brought new tasks, each dusk new lessons, and with every shared moment, the bond between her and the scout grew stronger. It was not forged in words, but in necessity, in trust earned through hardship and understanding, in the quiet acknowledgement that they depended on one another for survival. The scout remained a figure of stoic calm, observing the camp, the surrounding wilderness, and Emma herself with unwavering attentiveness. He spoke rarely, his communication relying on gestures, nods, and the occasional single word in her tongue. Yet Emma found that she understood him more fully than most people she had known before. Through action, through presence, and through small, intimate moments that conveyed care without the need for language. One morning, they set out to track a herd of deer in the distant hills. Emma had grown adept at moving silently, observing without being seen, and anticipating danger before it arrived. The scout glanced at her once, a flicker of approval in his eyes, and she felt a rush of pride, tempered by a lingering awareness of the perils that still lay ahead. As they crouched behind a rocky outcrop, watching the herd graze, Emma whispered a question she had been holding back. "Why did you save me?" Her voice was barely audible over the rustling leaves. The scout did not answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to her bandaged side, then to the landscape around them, and finally, back at her. Emma understood, slowly, that his reasons were simple, yet profound. He had acted because it was right, because she was vulnerable, and because he possessed the skills to protect her. It was not about ownership, but about responsibility, and in that realization, a deeper layer of trust formed between them. Later, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the hills, a sudden cry startled them. A rattlesnake had appeared, coiled and ready to strike. Instinctively, Emma froze. The scout reacted instantly, moving between her and the danger, his hand steady as he dispatched the threat. Emma's heart pounded, but instead of fear, she felt gratitude, and alongside it, a new awareness of her reliance on him. Not just for protection, but for guidance, for understanding, and for the quiet reassurance that she was not alone. As they returned to the camp that evening, Emma noticed how their relationship had shifted. The scout's protective presence was no longer a barrier, but a bridge. She trusted him implicitly, and in turn, he relied on her growing capabilities. They shared responsibilities in small ways, fetching water, tending the fire, preparing meals. Even in silence, they communicated through action, through glances and gestures, through the unspoken acknowledgement of shared purpose. The tribe noticed the change as well. Whispers of admiration and curiosity followed them. How the young woman, once fragile and uncertain, now moved with skill and awareness alongside the stoic scout. But it was not recognition from others that mattered to Emma. It was the knowledge that the man who had saved her life had become not only her protector, but her companion, someone she could depend on completely. One evening, under a sky painted with stars, they sat together near a small fire. Emma dared a question she had not voiced before. "Do you ever fear for yourself?" The scout's eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. A faint nod, a slow exhale, and then a gesture toward the camp, toward the horizon, toward her. She understood. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. He trusted her to understand, to observe, to learn, not just to survive, but to grow alongside him. In that quiet night, surrounded by the soft sounds of the sleeping camp, Emma felt the full weight and depth of their bond. It was not born of romance alone, nor merely of circumstance. It was forged in the fires of adversity, in the shared understanding of life's fragility, in the unspoken promise that they would watch over one another. For the first time since she had been left for dead, Emma felt a profound sense of connection. She was no longer a victim of circumstance, nor a stranger in a foreign land. She was part of a partnership rooted in trust, strengthened by shared trials, and tempered by respect. And as she leaned back, watching the flickering flames and the silhouette of the scout against the night, she realized that survival was only the beginning. The bond they shared, silent, steadfast, unshakable, was something far greater, a foundation on which new possibilities, and perhaps even love, could be built. The peace of the camp was fragile, a thin veneer over the ever-present tension of the frontier. Emma had grown accustomed to the rhythms of daily life, to the quiet strength of the scout, and to the subtle ways the tribe moved in harmony with the land. But the world beyond the valley remained unpredictable, and danger was never far. It began with faint signs, a broken branch here, a distant cloud of dust there. The scout noticed them first, his eyes narrowing, muscles tensing with the instinct of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the land. He gestured for Emma to follow, moving swiftly but silently, guiding her to a hidden overlook where they could observe without being seen. Down in the valley below, a group of men emerged from the tree line. Settlers. Emma recognized some from the attack that had left her for dead. Their eyes scanned the terrain, their rifles poised. The memory of that day, the smoke, the screams, the sudden betrayal, resurfaced, sharp and unforgiving. Emma's pulse quickened. She had survived once, but the threat of these men reminded her how close she had come to death. The scout remained calm, moving behind her and placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. His touch was reassurance, a silent promise that she would not face this danger alone. Emma felt a surge of trust and determination. She had learned from him, grown stronger and more aware, and she now understood that survival required both courage and reliance on those she trusted. For hours, they observed the intruders. The scout's keen eyes detected every movement, every attempt to conceal their approach. He communicated through subtle gestures, directing Emma to stay low, to move quietly, and to anticipate the enemy's actions. Emma followed his guidance, her fear tempered by the lessons she had learned in the days and weeks since being found. As night fell, the settlers approached the outskirts of the camp, unaware that they were being watched. The scout signaled for the tribe to prepare defenses, and Emma joined in, carrying supplies and following his instructions. The elders and warriors moved with practiced efficiency, but Emma realized that the real test was not just in defense, it was in trust. Trust that the scout would protect her, trust that she could act when needed, trust in the bond they had forged. Suddenly, a shot rang out, piercing the night. Emma ducked instinctively, heart hammering, and the scout moved like lightning, positioning himself between her and the source of danger. His movements were precise, almost instinctual, as he assessed the threat and prepared to counter it. Emma followed his lead, using the skills he had taught her to stay hidden and alert. The confrontation escalated, forcing both Emma and the scout to act decisively. They guided the tribe through strategic maneuvers, using the terrain to their advantage. Emma's heart raced with fear and adrenaline, but also with a strange exhilaration. She realized that the scout had not only saved her life physically, but had also prepared her mentally and emotionally to face danger. Hours later, as the settlers retreated, defeated and wary of the tribe's skill and knowledge of the land, Emma sank to the ground, exhausted but alive. The scout knelt beside her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that conveyed both pride and relief. No words were necessary. The bond between them had been tested, and it had held firm. That night, as the camp settled once more into quiet, Emma reflected on what had happened. She had faced her past, confronted fear, and survived a threat that could have ended everything. But more importantly, she had learned the power of trust and the strength of the bond she shared with the scout. He had been her protector, her teacher, and her partner in survival. Together, they had faced danger and emerged stronger. For the first time, Emma understood the full depth of her connection to him. It was not just survival that bound them. It was loyalty, trust, and the unspoken promise that neither would face the perils of this harsh world alone. And as she looked at him silhouetted against the firelight, she realized that the dangers of the wilderness and the threats from the past had only solidified what had quietly grown between them. A bond that was unbreakable, a partnership forged in trust and tested by fire. The wilderness, once a place of survival and learning, had become a crucible, testing both Emma and the scout in ways they had never anticipated. The tension from the recent encounter with the settlers had not fully dissipated. Whispers of rival hunters and wandering dangers carried on the wind, reminding them that safety was temporary and vigilance was eternal. It was during one of these quiet days, while scouting a ridge that overlooked the valley, that disaster struck. A sudden ambush by a small band of hostile men erupted without warning. Their rifles cracked through the air, echoing off the cliffs, and arrows whistled past with lethal intent. Emma's heart raced as instinct took over. She ducked behind a boulder, trembling, yet aware that she could not remain passive. The scout was immediately beside her, positioning himself between her and the incoming threat. His movements were precise, trained, and unhesitating. He assessed the attackers with rapid calculation, signaling for Emma to move in tandem with him. Every lesson he had taught her, the silent tracking, the awareness of the terrain, the subtle communication through gestures, came into play. Emma realized that their survival depended on their ability to act as one. As the ambush intensified, Emma's initial fear transformed into focus. She remembered the hunter's paths, the hidden nooks, and the techniques the scout had shown her. She moved with careful determination, retrieving small stones and hurling them to mislead the attackers, creating distractions. The scout watched her, eyes narrowing in approval, signaling her when to change position, when to stay low, and when to retreat behind cover. Hours felt like minutes as the struggle continued. The attackers underestimated the duo, believing Emma to be helpless. But her confidence had grown through days of shared hardship. She moved silently, assisted by the scout's strategic guidance, and even managed to incapacitate one of the attackers by causing him to stumble into a concealed trap. The scout had taught her to recognize, amid the chaos, the scout faced the fiercest threat. An assailant lunged from the side, aiming for him, and Emma's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she pushed him aside, taking a minor wound herself. The pain was sharp, but she ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of their movements, the synergy they had built through weeks of training and reliance. The scout, momentarily surprised by her intervention, recovered quickly, neutralizing the remaining attackers with skill honed over a lifetime. When silence finally returned, the dust settled and the wounded lay attended. Emma sank to the ground, gasping. The scout knelt beside her, his hands checking her injuries with careful precision. He did not scold her, nor express anger. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent affirmation. She had survived, and more importantly, she had proven herself. For Emma, the experience was transformative. She had faced danger, confronted her fears, and acted decisively under pressure. The scout's trust in her had never wavered, but now she understood the depth of the bond they shared. They were no longer teacher and student, protector and rescued. They were partners, united by shared experience, mutual reliance, and unwavering trust. That evening, back at the camp, the tribe gathered, murmuring in admiration at Emma's courage. She had not only survived, but had played an active role in protecting the camp, earning respect in a way that transcended the previous cultural barriers. The scout's pride was quiet but unmistakable, visible in the way he stood a little taller, in the brief glance he gave her, in the subtle gestures that conveyed approval without words. As the firelight flickered, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from being left for dead to surviving the wilderness, to learning the ways of a world foreign to her, and finally, to facing life-threatening danger with courage. The ultimate test had not only proven her strength, but had cemented the bond between her and the scout, a bond that could withstand fear, adversity, and the harshest trials of the frontier. In that moment, beneath the endless expanse of stars, Emma realized that survival was no longer her sole aim. Trust, courage, and connection had become her new compass. And in the silent presence of the scout who had claimed her life and her heart, she understood that she was no longer merely surviving. She was truly living, strengthened by love, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond forged in fire, danger, and shared destiny. The dawn broke over the valley with a soft, golden light that seemed to promise renewal. Emma stood at the edge of the camp, watching as the tribe began their daily routines. The air carried the familiar sense of wood smoke, earth, and herbs, and for the first time, Emma felt a deep sense of belonging rather than fear or uncertainty. Over the weeks, she had transformed from a fragile survivor into a capable, confident woman. She knew the rhythms of the land, the unspoken rules of the camp, and the delicate balance of trust and respect that held the tribe together. But more importantly, she had forged a bond with the scout who had saved her life, one built on mutual reliance, courage, and unwavering trust. The scout approached quietly, his presence steady and reassuring. He did not speak immediately, simply standing beside her, allowing her to take in the scene before them. Emma glanced at him and saw in his eyes the same calm intensity that had guided her through danger, taught her the ways of the land, and shared in her triumphs and fears. She understood, without words, that their journey together had led them here, to a place where survival and belonging intertwined. An elder approached, smiling warmly. She gestured for Emma to join a small ceremonial gathering. Emma stepped forward, heart steady, and participated with confidence and respect. The tribe observed her, not as an outsider or a curiosity, but as one of their own, a woman who had learned, endured, and proven herself. Their acceptance was a balm to her soul, confirming that the wilderness she had once feared was now a place where she could thrive. The scout remained nearby, watching her with quiet pride. Then, in a gesture that carried the weight of their shared history, he reached for her hand. This time, it was not a claim in the formal sense, nor a promise of protection alone. It was an acknowledgement of equality, partnership, and the bond that had grown between them through shared trials. Emma grasped his hand firmly, understanding that trust, respect, and connection formed the foundation of something deeper than mere survival. Together, they walked through the camp, observing the life around them. Children laughed as they ran between the dwellings, women prepared food with skill and grace, and men worked with precision and care. The wilderness, once an enemy, now seemed alive with harmony and balance. Emma felt a sense of peace she had never known, a quiet joy in belonging to a community that valued life, respect, and unity. Over the next days, Emma embraced her new life fully. She helped hunt, gathered herbs, tended the camp, and learned even more from the scouts' knowledge of the land. They moved in a rhythm that spoke of shared purpose and growing affection, their silent understanding deepening with each passing moment. She realized that the bond they shared had evolved into something more profound than fear, survival, or obligation. It was love, grounded in respect and forged in the fires of adversity. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Emma and the scout sat together overlooking the valley. The wind carried the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of the tribe settling in for the night. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of his presence, the quiet assurance that they would face whatever came together. For the first time since the attack that had nearly claimed her life, Emma felt truly safe, not just in body, but in spirit. The scout, silent as ever, reached for her hand again, intertwining his fingers with hers. No words were needed. In that touch was the promise of companionship, the acknowledgement of love, and the understanding that they had both survived, grown, and changed together. The wilderness had tested them, the dangers had forged them, and the bond between them had become unbreakable. Emma looked out over the valley, inhaling the crisp air, and allowed herself to believe in the future. She was no longer a stranger, no longer abandoned, and no longer defined by fear or loss. She had been saved, claimed, and guided, but in the process she had also reclaimed herself. And beside the man who had become her protector, her teacher, and her partner, she knew that a new life awaited, one filled with belonging, trust, love, and the promise of enduring partnership. As night fell and the stars appeared above the valley, Emma felt a deep, unshakable certainty. The past had been harsh, the journey perilous, but the future, shared with the scout and embraced fully, was hers to live. Together, they had survived the wilderness, conquered danger, and discovered something far greater than either could have imagined. A life built on trust, courage, and love.